welcome to the bonus lecture that I'm just doing because I like talking about it. And I'll put some bonus questions on the final. Getting out of here, so a chance to pick up some extra points. So there'll be enough questions on the final to pass the final without watching this one. But anyway, I thought I'd spend a few minutes talking about manned spaceflight. So I have this PowerPoint here I did when I was teaching a system for a class called American Aviation in Peace and War. So that's why it says that. But this is just U.S. History 1302. But I want to just talk a little bit about the space program because it's interesting, and it's interesting to me, and it was exciting to me. When I was a little bit younger than you are, when I was in junior high, which was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, now it's called middle school, but anyway, there were people walking on the moon, and you could sit at home, because one of these was, I think, during my summer vacation, if I recall. You could sit at home and turn on the TV and watch people walking on the moon. How crazy is that? Okay, and so it was a very exciting time. So I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about this because now it's like ancient history to you folks. So let's get on with it, shall we? So just a little bit of background material, because remember, this is a U.S. History Survey class. We're going to focus on U.S. stuff, but give you a little bit of background material. Okay. So first of all, if you're going to do space flight, you need rockets. So rockets aren't new. So the Chinese were messing around with rockets back in 1232. It says here. Okay. These are basically what we would think of today as fireworks. Okay. Bottle rockets, that sort of thing. All right. But they've been around a long time. Okay. They were used in the War of 1812. There's a song about this. Something about the rockets, red glare. Gosh, where have we heard that? In 1812, the British used rockets to bombard Fort McHenry, okay, outside of Baltimore. And these things are pretty primitive. You're not guided. You just point them in the right direction, light the fuse. Largely just kind of a psychological weapon. Okay, although if one went off right next to you, I'm sure it was very dangerous. Okay. So rockets, like I said, been around a long time. But for our practical purposes, we're going to start talking about things that are happening in the 20th century, which is the time frame of this class. Okay. There was a famous Russian rocket scientist. I'm not going to try to pronounce his name because I don't speak Russian. Okay. But you see the dates are 1857 to 1935. He was coming up with all kinds of theories about how rockets could work in space and that kind of stuff. And I don't really know much about this guy, to be honest, but I know he existed. Okay, and so this isn't just like an American thing. Science is international. The laws of physics are the same in Russia as they are in the United States, as they are in Botswana. Okay, the laws of physics don't change. All right, so there's people looking at, could you use rockets, to maybe fly in a vacuum? Okay, and so you don't need to know this guy's name. I just wanted to try to be thorough. So let's look at an American who's kind of a pioneer in rocketry. A guy named Robert Goddard, Dr. Robert Goddard, seen here in front of a bunch of equations and stuff that I wouldn't begin to understand. Okay. I could do math, I could be an engineer. I can't, so I'm a historian. So Goddard was working on some ideas. He was messing around with liquid-fueled rockets. Okay. The solid rockets, like the fireworks, okay, like the Chinese and the Congreve rockets, once you light them, you can't shut them off. You just have to wait for them to burn out. Okay? And you don't really control their thrust. Okay, you light them and off they go. Okay, and so Goddard was working on developing rockets that would work off of liquid fuel. These are very primitive. Okay, and this is, oh gosh, let me see. I've got a slide of him here. I wonder if it has a date on it. Yeah, here we go. Here he is with his first liquid-fueled rocket, March 16, 1926, in Auburn, Massachusetts. So this is prior to the Second World War. Okay. All right. Here, let me get my little pen here. Pen? This is the actual rocket nozzle right here. This is like the fuel. and this thing is just the launch stand. Okay, so he was working on very primitive, like liquid fuel type rockets. All right, but they flew. Okay, so he's trying to work out some of the details on this. Like I said, this is all prior to the Second World War. Now, rocketry, like wars often do, wars often cause advances in technology. Okay, new ways to kill people. The bazooka, the anti-tank weapon you see in movies, fires a rocket. It's a rocket propelled. It's a rocket launcher, is what it is. A little solid fuel rocket. Okay, but the big advance in rocketry that you really see during World War II involves, guess what? The Germans, who, for all their faults, like do engineering, right? Okay. Oh, here's some patents. See, I haven't looked at this PowerPoint in years. Selected patents of Robert Goddard. Okay, so he did a lot of work. Okay, that later was incorporated into new designs. Okay, here's the Germans. All right. So the Germans had become interested in rocketry prior to World War II, and with World War II, of course, there's money available, and so the Germans developed a rocket called the V2. Okay. And this was a very primitive rocket by our standards today, but it's probably the first thing you'd see that actually looks recognizable to you as a modern rocket. Okay, the Germans would this is happening late in the war. The Germans would launch these. Now the guidance systems are basically non-existent practically. They were very primitive. But they would launch these from occupied Europe towards London, and some other cities like Antwerp later, but they basically point them in the direction. If they can do some basic calculations, well, there's this much fuel, we send it up at this angle, it's going to come down, and it'll land over here. So I mean, they've got, they do actually manage to hit London with some of these things, okay? And they could pack a sizable warhead. It's like dropping a bomb, basically. But what was terrifying about this was if there's an air raid, you can detect airplanes coming in, you can hear the motors. Say, hey, we're going to get to the bomb shelters, but the V2 is like supersonic. It flies up into the upper atmosphere and then just plummets down. And so the first inkling you have that a V2 is heading your way is when it explodes, basically. You're walking down the street and there goes a building, and hey, it was a V2 just landed. All right. So the Germans are advancing, coming up with new technologies and improving things that people like Goddard have been working on. Okay. Now, at the end of the war, okay, when it became obvious that the Germans were going to lose, okay, and the Soviets are coming in from the east. If you live in Germany, the Soviets were coming in from the east. The Americans and British are coming in from the west. Some of the rocket scientists, decided, we're going to probably end up being captured, and some of the higher-ranking ones, some of the smarter ones, decided we really don't want to get captured by the Soviet Union. It's a totalitarian, communistic regime. Let's head west and try to get surrender to the Americans or the British, whoever we can find. Okay. Now, some of these fellows, one question comes up, were these guys Nazis? Some of them were. A lot of people joined the Nazi Party just, it's the Nazi Party. It doesn't necessarily mean you were a true believer per se. Some of them might have. I mean, I never talked to any of these people, but they head west, try to find the Americans, and they do. Okay, so there's a whole picture of a whole group of these guys. Here you go. Here's a whole bunch of Germans. Okay, all right. And they end up coming to the United States and working for the Army, developing the Army's rocket program. Okay. Now, I wouldn't expect you to know any of these names, except I highlighted in red the one you should know for our purposes, Dr. Werner von Braun. Okay. And let's see, Werner von Braun is the guy wearing a suit, and he's leaning against on the table. That's Werner von Braun. Okay. And so these Germans come over and basically surrender to the Americans, and end up working for the Army, developing rocketry. Okay, because very much more advanced than what we have. We also captured a lot of V2s and brought them back to the United States and would launch them because they knew for experiments. Okay, let's see how these things work. And sometimes you develop weapons, or you might put scientific experiments on them. So Wernher von Braun eventually rises very high up in the hierarchy. I've got a picture of him, I think, on the next slide here. There he is, Dr. Wernher von Braun. He eventually ends up working for NASA, okay, as the space program heats up. So here is his desk, and in the background you see a bunch of models of rockets that they were working on. Okay, they were working on a series called the Saturn, which went through many permeations. They had different sketches drawn up, and in the end, it was supposed to be like a family of rockets, but they basically only ever really built the Saturn 1, an upgraded version called the Saturn 1B, and then the Saturn 5. But they had, it was going to be like Legos. We could take this stage, put it here, but at some point they had to settle in on a handful of designs rather than try to develop everything. Okay. So that's Wernher von Braun. Now, in the 50s, he's working for the Army. Now, I talked about this in the lecture on Eisenhower. 1957 was supposed to be this big scientific year. I think I said compare it to like a big science fair for the world instead of just for your high school. And various countries were working to try to do things. And the United States was working to try to launch a satellite. It's called Project Vanguard. Okay, V-A-N-G-U-A-R-D, Vanguard. Okay. Now, when they were kicking these ideas around, von Braun, who was basically still working for the Army at this point, said, look, if you want to put a satellite up, we can do it. I can take one of my Redstone ballistic missiles that the Army uses. We can make some modifications. We can put a satellite on it. We can put it up into orbit. We can do that if you want. Just need some funding and some go-aheads. But the government's kind of like, no, we don't want to be seen as militarizing space. We don't want to launch, a satellite on top of an Army rocket. People might see it wrong. We want to develop a rocket for scientific purposes from scratch. And so we're working on this, like I said, it was called Project Vanguard. But then something happens. While we're trying to get all the bugs worked out of this thing, the Soviets launched Sputnik. Okay, October 4th, 1957. All right. Now this thing, I think I told you in the Eisenhower lecture, doesn't do much. It just goes around here, goes beep, 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 beep. Well, not that fast. It's just a radio transponder. But, I mean, that's impressive enough. They've managed to get this thing into orbit. Okay? All right. Now, what everybody's scared about is if the Soviets have a rocket big enough to put a satellite into orbit, could they also put a warhead on it and drop it onto Washington, D.C.? Sure, they could. The Soviet rockets are actually more powerful than ours, for reasons maybe I'll get into here in the next little thing. Okay? But we have egg on our face. The United States has been embarrassed. The Soviets have beat us into space, okay, making it seem like maybe their technology is superior. It really isn't, but it's different. Okay. But the U.S. is like, don't worry. We've got a rocket too. We're ready to launch our satellite. We've got a satellite called the Vanguard. Watch this. And so we try to launch the Vanguard on September 6, 1957, and you can see here what happens. It blows up in front of news cameras everywhere. So the Soviets kind of do everything in secret. If they launch a satellite successfully, then they'll tell you. We basically blow up our rocket in front of the whole world. Okay? And the satellite falls to the ground and it's sitting there going beep, beep. And now the government goes back to von Braun and said, you said you could put up a satellite? He said, yeah. And so we managed to put up a satellite in January of 1958. It's called Explorer 1. Okay, so a little bit after the Soviets. We take an Army Redstone missile, put an extra stage on it, put a satellite on it, send the satellite up, successfully reaches orbit, and it does some science and discovers the Van Allen radiation belts. And so now the space race is on. Okay, the Soviets have beat us into space, but we're not going to go down without a fight, and we're out of time.